emerging economies, especially the so-called BRICS or BRICSAM or CIBS, depending who you talk to, they're extremely important to the trade system and to the world economy overall. Now, some of them have been active in trade negotiations, not only in the Doha round, but in the Uruguay round, especially Brazil and India. China has been a little less active lately, especially since their accession. They seem to have accessed the WTO. My opinion is that the major reasoning for it was to push internal reforms and sell it domestically as though the WTO accession was important. So that the internal reforms could get pushed and go a little faster. Now, from my point of view, China has not been active in terms of negotiating process and has not been maybe a troublemaker like the Brazilians and the Indians might be seen, because they got from the WTO what they wanted to get. They are in the club. This was the objective, to become part of the club, to not be seen as an outsider. They are in the Security Council at the UN. The G7, G8 process needs to be reformed sooner than later. And WTO was another step for them to become the internationally recognized power. Now, the concessions that they made during the accession protocols are enormous, and some of the concessions are actually not that easy to understand why they have agreed to all of this. One example would be the non-market economy status that they have agreed to, which doesn't really put them in a good situation. And that actually is something that they're trying to solve now through the regional agreements. Now, I think their inactivity within the negotiating process also comes from it's culturally based. People in the North, let's say North America, especially, and the Europeans, don't quite understand how the Chinese thinking process is happening. For them, the WTO, as opposed to the view of the Americans and the Europeans, WTO and the rules there for the Chinese are not quite law as they are perceived in North America and Europe. For the Chinese, the WTO and the accession process, and now them being a full member, was more so about creating a platform for further discussion and cooperation than just dealing with the laws and rules and regulations imposed by the WTO on them and on other members, obviously. So the way that the Chinese approach this, I think, is that they are now part of the club. They are friends, so to speak, so they want to talk. Now, whether or not the rules and the laws within the WTO are being applied in China or by China elsewhere, that's a totally different story for them. And I don't think the Chinese approach to WTO and the negotiations is as legalistic as the American or the European approach. So that's an extremely important cultural difference. I don't think they will change their policy stance over the long term, and neither do I think that they should. The Chinese approach is very pragmatic. Whenever they see an obstacle, they will try to find a way around it. This happened in the textiles after the abolition of the MFA. There's supposed to be no imposed restrictions now on the Chinese exports, but there in fact are. And the only difference between the MFA and what's happening now is that those restrictions are being imposed by individual countries as opposed to a bigger multilateral agreement. The Chinese are finding a way around it. For example, their trade in textiles and clothing with the two newest members of the European Union, Romania and Bulgaria, spiked by approximately 800%. So for the Chinese, it's a door to the European Union, and it's a way of going around the restrictions that have been imposed on them from the European Union. And this happens elsewhere as well. This happens in the United States and in other countries, and the Chinese seem to be very capable at finding a way around things. And this is, I think, their pragmatic approach to things. Now, in the long term, will they take ownership to some degree of the WTO and the negotiating process? I don't know. This is, I think, a bigger question for all of the emerging economies and, quite honestly, for the developing countries as well. Clearly, the OECD, the Europeans and the Americans, and especially, are not quite capable of putting the system sort of back on track, if you want to use that expression. Brazilians and Indians are considered troublemakers in the WTO, especially because they do stand up to the Americans and to the Europeans. Brazilians on the agricultural, this is an ongoing issue. It hasn't been happening since yesterday. The Chinese are much more pragmatic, and I think their approach is to work a little bit more behind the scenes, be a little gentler, not to try impose their power and their strength on other people. This is what they are doing in the regional agreements. They custom tailor agreements to their specific partner. They seem to be recognizing the partners, where the partner is coming from and what the conditions are. But at the same time, they're trying to get a lot from it. So I think they're extremely pragmatic in what they do, and I think this will continue. And I don't think they will want to necessarily become a new hegemon of the system. I don't think they agree with the way the Americans and the Europeans are doing business in the WTO. And I don't think the Chinese will want to take that role from them, quite honestly. And I don't think they will be, if they decide to do that, I don't think they will be going the same route.